Little Black Dress by James Patterson with Emily Raymond, to be read by Maria Eliza Nunez. Can a little black dress change everything in her life? Magazine editor Jane Avery spends her nights alone with Netflix and Oreos until the dress turns her loose. Suddenly, she's surrendering to dark desires, and New York City has become her erotic playground. But what began as a fantasy will go too far, and her next conquest could be her last. Prologue. I spotted it on the Bergdorf sale rack, see-through black chiffon layered over a simple black sheet, cut to skim lightly over the hips and fall just above the knee. Paired with a thin gold belt, there was something Grecian, even goddessy, about it. It was somehow subtle, yet spectacular. Not a dress, but a dress. When I tried it on, I was no longer Jane Avery, age 35, overworked editor at Manhattan's Metropolitan Magazine and recent divorcee. I was Jane Avery, age none of your business, a card-carrying member of the media elite, a woman who was single and proud of it. Even at 40% off, the dress was a minor fortune. I decided to buy it anyway. And that purchase changed everything. Chapter 1. In the opulent limestone lobby of the Four Seasons, New York, I handed over my Amex. A City View King, please. No tremor in my voice at all. Nothing to betray the pounding of my heart, the adrenaline flooding my veins. Am I really about to do this? Maybe I should have had another glass of rose. The desk clerk tapped quickly on her keyboard. We have a room on the 40th floor, she said. Where are you two visiting from? I shot a glance over my shoulder. Honestly? About 25 blocks from here. My knees were turning into jello. Behind me, Michael Bishop, a thumb hook in the belt loop of his jeans, flashed his gorgeous smile. First at me, then at the clerk. Ohio, miss, he said, giving his muscled shoulders an oh shucks shrug. His eyes were green as jade. Mighty big city you got here, darling, he said, a drawl slipping into his voice. Ohio, the clerk repeated, like it was the most beautiful word she'd ever heard. She looked like she was unbuttoning his shirt with her eyes as she handed me the room key. Very unprofessional, if you ask me. But then again, how professional was it to check into a hotel with one of Metropolitan's freelance writers, who, by the way, had obviously never even been to Ohio? If he had, he'd have known they don't talk like cowboys there. Michael Bishop lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I live on the Upper West Side. We'd known each other since our first years in the magazine business. Today we'd met for lunch to go over a story he was writing for Metropolitan. The cafe, an elegant little French place with fantastic hamburger sandwiches, was close to my office. It was also close to the Four Seasons. We'd laughed, we'd had a glass of rose, and now suddenly we were here. Am I really about to do this? If you want tickets to a Broadway show or reservations at Rouse, the concierge can assist you, the clerk offered. By now she'd taken off Michael's shirt and was licking his chest. Actually, I said, we have other plans. I grabbed Michael's hand and pulled him into the elevator before I lost my nerve. We stood in front of our reflections in the gold mirrored doors. Really? I said to Mirror Michael, who was as gorgeous as the real Michael but yellower. Ohio? He laughed. I know, Jane. You're a former fact checker, so the truth is very important to you, he said. I, however, am a writer, and I take occasional liberties with it. He stepped closer to me, and then he slipped an arm around my waist. "Nice dress, by the way," he said. "Do you also take occasional liberties with your editors?" I asked, trying to be playful. He shook his head. "Never," he said. I believed him, but it didn't matter either way. This had been my idea. It wasn't about loneliness or even simple lust, though that obviously played a part. I just wanted to know if I could do something like this without feeling weird or cheap. I still wasn't sure. The hotel room was a gleaming, cream-colored box of understated luxury. A bottle of Chardonnay waited in a silver wine bucket, and there were gourmet chocolates arranged on the pillows. Through the giant windows, Manhattan glittered, a spectacle of steel and glass. I stood in the center of the beautiful room, holding my purse against my body like a kind of shield. I was charged and excited and all of a sudden a little bit scared. This was new territory for me. If I didn't turn tail and run right now, I was about to do something I'd barely even had the guts to imagine. Michael, his green eyes both gentle and hungry, took the purse from my hands and placed it on a chair. Straightening up again, he brushed my hair away from my neck, and then he kissed me, gently, right above my collarbone. A shiver ran down my spine. "Is this okay?" he asked softly. I remembered the way he'd kissed my fingers at the cafe. I remembered how I'd said to him, "Let's get out of here." I wanted this. "Yes," I breathed. "It's more than okay." His lips moved up my neck, his tongue touching my skin ever so lightly. He traced a finger along my jawline and then slowly drew it down again, stopping at the low neckline of the dress. I waited, trembling, for him to slip his hand inside the silk, but he didn't. He paused, barely breathing, and then he reached around my back and found the slender zipper between my shoulder blades. He gave it a sharp tug, and the black silk slid down my body in a whisper. I stood there, exposed, breathless, thrilled, and then Michael crushed his lips to mine. We kissed deeply, hungrily. I ran my palms up his strong arms, his broad shoulders. He reached under me and lifted me up, and I wrapped my legs around his waist. He tasted like wine. I whispered my command, "Take me to bed." Then I added, "Please." So polite. He murmured into my hair, "Anything you say, Jane." He carried me to the giant bed and laid me down on it. His fingers found my nipples through the lace of my bra, and then my bra, too, seemed to slip off my body, and his mouth was where his fingers had been. I gasped. Yes, oh yes, I'm really doing this. His tongue teased me, pulled at me. His hands seemed to be everywhere at once. "Should I?" he began. I said, "Don't talk, just do." I did not add "please" this time. I wriggled out of my panties as he undressed. Then he was naked before me, golden in the noonlight, looking like some kind of Greek demigod descended from Mount Olympus. I stretched up my arms and Michael fell into them. He kissed me again as I arched to meet him. When he thrust himself inside me, I cried out, rocking against his hips, kissing his shoulder, his neck, his chin. I pulled him into me with all my strength as the heat inside me rose in waves. When I cried out in release, my nails dug into Michael's shoulders. A moment later he cried out too, and then he collapsed on top of me, panting. I couldn't believe it. I'd really done it. Spent, we both slept for a little while. When I awoke, Michael was standing at the end of the bed, his shirt half buttoned, his golden chest still visible. A smile broke over his gorgeous face. "Jane Avery, that was an incredible lunch." Michael Bishop said, "Could I interest you in dinner?" I smiled back at him from the tangle of ivory sheets. as perfect as he was, as this had been, today was a one-time deal. I wasn't ready to get involved again. Actually, I said, thank you, but I have other plans. He looked surprised. A guy like Michael wasn't used to being turned down. Okay, he said after a moment. I get it. I doubted that he did. It's not you, I thought. It's me. After he kissed me goodbye, sweetly, longingly, I turned on the water in the deep porcelain tub. I'd paid $700 for this room, and I might as well enjoy it a little longer. I sunk into the bath, luxuriant with lavender-scented bubbles. It was crazy what I'd done, but I'd love it, and I didn't feel cheap. Au contraire, I felt rich. Chapter 2. I swiped a free Perrier from the office fridge, one of the perks of working at Metropolitan, and hurried to my desk, only to find Brian, my best friend and the magazine's ad sales director, draped dramatically across its cluttered surface. You took the longest lunch, she said accusingly. We were supposed to get cappuccinos at Ground Central. I'm sorry, I said distractedly. I could see the message light on my phone blinking. My meeting, my meeting didn't exactly go as planned. I'm going to have to work late tonight. Oh, murder. She gave a long theatrical sigh. Bus and car. I couldn't help smiling. Brian was 1/4 French. The rest of her was full-blown New Jersey. On a good day, she was funny and loud, as effervescent as a glass of champagne. On a bad day, she was like Napoleon, with lipstick and PMS. Can we do it tomorrow? I asked. Bry still looked sulky. You realize, don't you, that you stay late because you're avoiding your complete lack of a social life? I stay because I care about my job. I tugged discreetly at my bra. Somehow I'd managed to put it on wrong. So do I, Bry said. But you don't see me here at 9 p.m. on a Friday. You're in a different department, I said, unwilling to admit that she had a point. She took one of my blue editing pencils and twisted her pretty auburn hair around it, making an artfully messy bun. I was going to set you up on a date tonight, you know. We've gone over this, Bry, I said firmly. I'm not interested. Bry lifted herself from my desk and stood before me with her hands on her hips, 5 inches shorter than me. She had to crane her neck up. I know how much you love your Netflix and Oreo nights, honey, but it's time you got back into the game. I did love those nights, even though I'd be the first to admit that too many of them in a row got depressing. I'm not ready to date, Bry. I like the sidelines. Bry held up a manicured finger. First of all, you've been divorced for almost a year and a half. Thanks for keeping track, I said. Bry held up another finger. Second of all, this guy's practically perfect. Then you date him, I suggested. You're single now too, aren't you? Or did you fall in love again last night? Bry giggled. She gave her heart away like it was candy on Halloween. There's the cutest guy in my spinning class, she admitted. She drifted off into a dreamy reverie for a moment. Then she shook her head and snapped back to attention. Hey, you're changing the subject. We're talking about you and your non-existent sex life. A blush flared hot on my cheeks. Bry immediately widened her eyes at me. Her mouth fell open, and then she nearly shouted, Oh my God! You got laid last night! I looked wildly around. Shh! I hissed. My boss assistant was 5 feet away at the Xerox machine. She didn't seem to have heard Bry's accusation, though. Turning back to my friend, I made an effort to keep a straight face, to look serious and professional. I did not get laid last night, I said. I got laid an hour ago. Bryce's merry brown eyes grew narrow. The more I look at you, the more I think there's something different about you today, she said. I shrugged. Well, I'm wearing a new dress. I gave a little twirl. Isn't it fantastic? Bryce's skeptical expression softened, but barely. If you weren't the most honest person I've ever met, I'd swear you were lying to me, Jane Avery. I smiled. I'd never lie to you, hon, I said, but I might stretch the truth. Are you sure you won't go out tonight? She whispered. I want you to find a good man. I sucked in my breath. My mood suddenly shifted. I thought I had, I said. Bry looked at me sympathetically. I'm sorry, you married a bastard, Janie. He fooled us all, she said. But one error shouldn't ban you from the playing field. I rubbed the spot where the big diamond ring used to be. James had loved me. He really had. But he'd also loved his ex-girlfriend and her sister. Enough with the sports metaphors, Brian, I pleaded. Brian mimed a baseball swing. You gotta step up to the plate, she said, smirking just to annoy me. And you've gotta get back to your own desk, I said, laughing. I have work to do. Bry walked reluctantly to the door and then turned back around. Don't you want to know who your date was going to be? Not really. I picked up my phone and pressed the messages button. Michael Bishop, she said as she walked away. He is so handsome. The receiver fell to my desk with a clunk. Step up to the plate, Bry. I thought I did. And Michael Bishop was my home run. Chapter 3. Walking into Al's diner at 90th and Columbus after work that evening, I inhaled the familiar smell of grease and burned coffee, and underneath that the subtle whiff of good olive oil, salty feta, and ripe heirloom tomatoes. My mouth watered as I slid into my familiar booth. Al's diner looked like just another greasy spoon, but I knew its secret. Colloquito Ceftedes and Dolmades, aka zucchini fritters and stuffed grape leaves. So delicious you'd swear you were on Santorini. Al Dimitriou spotted me and lumbered out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his stained apron. Janie, koritsunu, he said, my girl. It's late. Either you already ate and you're here for baklava, or you worked too long and you're starving. Door number 2, I said, smiling at him. Al shook his head at me. You work too hard, Janitza, he said. He turned and hollered, Veta, Jane is here. I know. Veta, Al's wife, came hurrying over with a basket of pita and a bowl of baba ganoush. It took all my self-control to say hello and thank you before I started shoveling it into my mouth. Veta patted my head and gave me a quick maternal once-over. You look very pretty tonight, Janie, she said, although the table manners. She nudged me affectionately. Sorry, I mumbled, famished. Al looked at me more carefully. You got a date after this? Why does everyone in New York City care about my dating life? No such plans, I said, my mouth still full of warm pita and smoky eggplant. Veta, who was as quick and petite as Al, was big and slow, swatted him on his giant shoulder. Just because she looks extra beautiful tonight doesn't mean she's going to see a man, she scolded. Don't be so old-fashioned. Al shrugged good-naturedly. I was just making conversation, just sticking your nose in a lady's business. Veta countered. She turned to me. Don't mind the big lug, she said. I don't mind him, I said. I love him. At that, Al got slightly red and excused himself saying something about needing to check on some fava beans. Veta sat down across from me. She grinned. So, do you? Do I what? I asked. I was having a hard time concentrating on anything other than the rich, delicious mise. I found an olive and popped it into my mouth. Have a date, you goose. No, Veta! I exclaimed. Why on earth? She ducked her head in embarrassment. Sorry, she said. I guess I was hoping. You don't need to hope for me, I said. I'm happy. And I was very happy right now. My God, the baba ganoush. Veta gazed thoughtfully out the window, where a flock of pigeons feasted on a discarded loaf of Wonder Bread. Then she turned back to me and said, So, my happy Janie, do you want the lamb or the octopus? I laughed at her matter of factness. Chef's choice, I said. She patted my hand. I'll take good care of you, she said. You always do, I said, because it was true. It might have looked like I was sitting alone in a diner on a Friday night, but as far as I was concerned, I was having dinner with friends. Chapter 4. By the time I said goodbye to Al and Veta, night had fallen. Metal grates covered the doors of the laundromat, the shoe boutique, and the store that specialized in $400 throw pillows, but cars and cabs still swept by on Columbus Avenue. Couples and dates strolled along, the women tottering in high, uncomfortable heels. One of the benefits of being 5'8". You can just say no to stilettos. As I stood on the corner waiting to cross, I could see the light in my third-floor kitchen burning small and yellow and alone. Netflix and Oreos, here I come, I thought. Just then, the wind caught the skirt of the dress. The black silk seemed to swirl away from me, like there was a different direction it wanted to go in. And why should I go home? I didn't have a dog or cat. I didn't even have a fish. The most I'd had was a cactus. By the way, don't believe the hype about cacti. You can kill them, and it's not even hard. A little way down the block, the Teddy's Piano Bar sign blinked invitingly. The tiny watering hole had been there since the 1920s, when it was a speakeasy full of smoke and music fueled by bathtub gin. I'd never gone inside, but tonight I walked straight toward it. The walls were covered in abstract murals painted by some famous, long-dead artist. At the piano, a silver-haired man with a truly enormous nose played Gershwin. Couples chattered at small, cozy tables, and candlelight flickered on the murals, turning them into swirls of color and line. I ordered a French 75 and sank into a banquet. Summertime and the living is easy, sang a black-haired beauty who'd joined the old man on the bench. I smiled. I'd always loved that song, but I couldn't carry a tune in a Kate Spade handbag, so I hummed along quietly. At the table next to me, a man sat alone with an unopened book and a glass of amber liquid. He'd taken off his tie and tucked it into the breast pocket of his gray linen suit. His fingers tapped along to the music. I noted the lack of a wedding ring. He had a good profile, deep-set eyes, and a strong chin. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. Should I thought. I definitely shouldn't. But then I changed my mind. I waited until the song had ended, and then I slid from the banquet into the chair next to him. Is this seat taken? I asked. The man looked up, startled. His dark eyebrows lifted. He smiled at me, a slow, almost shy smile. "I guess it is now," he said. "I'm Jane," I said. "Hi." "Hello, Jane. I'm Aiden," he said. He nodded toward my glass. "I'd buy you a drink, but you seem to have one already." I clinked my cocktail to his and took a sip of the bubbly liquid. "You can buy the next round," he laughed. "What if I bore you before that?" I gave him my best mock frown. "Don't tell me you have self-esteem problems, Aiden," I said. "You don't look like the type." He shrugged. "Let's just say I wasn't expecting a beautiful woman to sit down at my table tonight," he said. "Please, I'm not beautiful." That's what I almost said. But then I glanced down at my perfect, elegant dress and felt a surge of confidence. What if, in calling me beautiful, Aiden was actually right? I smiled, sipped delicately at my drink, and made a new rule for myself. If life hands you a compliment, take it. "This is a nice place," I said, looking around the dim, inviting room. "Do you come here often?" Then I felt like kicking myself for delivering such a cliche of a line. I then swirled his whiskey and the ice clicked in the glass. "You could call me a regular, I guess. The guy at the piano is my uncle." I looked at the homely silver-haired player again. "Hard to see the family resemblance," I said skeptically. I then said, "Really? I think we look exactly alike." "Uh-huh, you do have a self-esteem problem," I said. He grinned. "You have an understanding sarcasm problem," he countered. I laughed. I felt slightly tipsy, but it wasn't from the drink. I'd barely touched it. It was from being out on a Friday night and flirting with a handsome stranger. I'd already done one thing I'd never thought I'd do today. Why stop there? "So, what do you do, Jane?" I then asked. I shook my head. "Let's not talk about work." I then looked disappointed. "You mean I don't get the chance to tell you about my fascinating work in maritime law?" I leaned closer. "Do you prosecute pirates with peg legs and hooks for hands?" "If only," he said ruefully. "Then I'm not interested." I sat back and crossed my arms. "You'll have to come up with a better topic for discussion." I then laughed. "And now the beautiful woman makes conversational demands," he said. I giggled, but I didn't let myself apologize. And so this handsome stranger told me the story of his former cycling career, including the time he crashed on the Giro d'Italia, Italy's version of the Tour de France, and finished the day's race with a face dripping blood. I liked the way he moved closer to me to tell it, the way he kept his voice low so he wouldn't disrupt his uncle's playing. The song was Memory from Cats, and half the bar was mouthing the words. I was allergic to cats and cats, but I liked the feeling of Aiden's breath near my ear. And then the race was momentarily stopped by cows in the road, he was saying, and the guy next to me is yelling for Kavaka, which means big cow, literally, but also means damn it. His face shone with the memory. He looked so happy and alive that before I knew what I was doing, I put my hand on top of his. He stopped talking immediately. His eyes met mine, dark and questioning. The room at the Four Seasons was mine until tomorrow at 11 a.m. I knew that Aiden would go wherever I asked him to, do whatever I wanted him to do. He'd tell me cycling stories all night, or serenade me while his uncle played John Lennon's Imagine. Or he'd slip the dress from my shoulders and make love to me until I was cross-eyed. Wait a second. Was I absolutely insane? Jane, he said, his voice suddenly husky. I gazed into his dark eyes. My heart was thumping wildly. I made a decision. I said softly, "It's been so nice to meet you, but I have to go." Then I picked up my handbag and dashed out of the bar. As I ran down the street, the strains of the music of the night faded behind me until I could hear nothing but the wind. Chapter 5. The next day, I decided to take a last-minute getaway outside the city. I could fill my lungs with clean air and my mind with clean thoughts. My mistake was going to my sister's house in Westchester. My Lisa was 4 years older than me, but ever since my divorce, she'd been acting like my mother. 5 minutes into my visit, she told me I needed a haircut and highlights. An hour later, she tried to set me up with a divorced suburban lawyer who raced vintage cars in his spare time. I knew she was trying to help, but it bothered me. Sure, my Lisa had a beautiful house, a loving husband, and a perfect pair of 8-year-old daughters, but none of this made her an expert on my life. "You're not much of an expert on it either," she huffed. Point taken. We ended up having a nice weekend, eating and drinking and gossiping about her neighbors, but I had to admit I was glad to leave. It was late Sunday evening by the time I got back to Manhattan. But instead of hurrying home to the peace, quiet, and potentially depressing solitude of my bedroom, I found myself walking into the Campbell apartment, the upscale bar inside Grand Central Terminal. I took a seat at the mahogany bar. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I wondered if I'd made a mistake in coming here. It was like Valentine's Day in June. Everywhere I looked, someone was canoodling with someone else, sharing vintage cocktails, artisanal cheese plates, and deep romantic glances. "I'd recommend the Prohibition Punch and a bowl of toppled popcorn," said a voice, stiff with formality with a British accent. I looked up to see a bow-tied young bartender vigorously polishing a champagne flute. "It's just too sad to eat an entire artisanal cheese plate alone, isn't it?" I asked wryly. The bartender promptly lost his professional decorum by cracking up. "Absolutely not," he said, grinning. "You could eat anything you wanted, and it wouldn't be sad." He leaned forward and whispered, "But between the two of us, the Ardrahan smells funkier than an Iowa pig farm, and the Epoises has the bouquet of well-used gym towel." Now it was my turn to laugh. He was cute and funny, like a blonde Eddie Redmayne, accent and everything. "In that case, I'll have the popcorn," I said. "Excellent choice, miss," he said, taking a step back and clearly trying to regain his gravitas. I raised an eyebrow at him. "Please don't get stuffy again. A tip better when I'm entertained." "I shall dispense with the straight face," he said solemnly, "and I would be most honored to entertain you." And then he offered me a huge goofy grin. "Wanna see my Arnold Schwarzenegger impression?" I most certainly did. He looked quickly around, checking for his boss, no doubt. And then he cocked his head, hunched his shoulders, and transformed into the Terminator as he mixed my cocktail. I clapped. "You must be an actor," I said. "Me and every other bartender in town," he said. "Tough way to make a living?" I asked sympathetically. For a second he looked slightly chagrined. "Yeah, but just you wait," he said, brightening. "Someday you'll go to the movies and my face will be up there, 20 feet tall, and you'll go, 'I know that guy? He made me a great drink. And he forgot to put in the order for the popcorn, I added. He flushed, embarrassed. Wow, I'm not doing my job very well, am I? Well, if part of your job is entertaining a single girl in a couple's bar, then you deserve a raise, I said. Single, huh? He said, raising an eyebrow. I shrugged as if to say, maybe not for long. Because I had the sudden idea that he and I would make a great couple for about 2 hours. You don't even know his name, Jane, said the small voice of my sanity. So ask him, and then see when he gets off work, said a different voice entirely. When he put the popcorn in front of me, we both took a big handful, but suddenly we were both too shy to speak. Then I said, I think, at the same time that he said, do you want? We laughed awkwardly. It was like being in seventh grade again. We were saved by a pearl bedeck waitress, who appeared by my elbow with a cheese plate. Kitchen made an extra, she said to my English bartender. You guys want this? I grinned at him. Ooh, the barnyard, I said, and I don't even have to eat it alone. You never know when you're going to get lucky, he said. Then, obviously feeling more confident, he flashed me a rakish grin. Right? The double entendre was extremely clear. I smiled back at him, imagining all the possibilities. For one thing, no one had talked dirty to me in an English accent before, but the small voice of my sanity was trying to make itself heard. Go home and go to bed, it said, alone. It clarified. I picked up the parsley garnish and nervously ripped it into green confetti. What am I going to do? Hey, he said. Earth to Jane, I said. And you are? Tom, he said, with an H. Tom, I said quickly. Can I get your number? He looked confused, but he scribbled it onto a napkin and handed it to me. I tucked it into my purse, then I laid down $50 and blew him a kiss. I'll call you, I said, even though I knew I wouldn't. You're a coward, Jane, I thought as I hurried down the steps to the train station. No, you're very smart. Chapter 6. I had a Metropolitan editorial meeting at 10 a.m. At 8, though clutching a takeout coffee half the size of my torso, I strode into the office of my therapist, Alex Jensen, PhD, and blurted, Do you think I'm crazy? Dr. Jensen looked up at me and smiled. He was 40-ish, attractive in a bookish way. He squinted whenever he wasn't wearing his glasses, which was most of the time. Good morning, Jane. And no, not especially, he said, still smiling. Do you think you're crazy? I shrugged. Yes. No, I don't know. He leaned back in his chair and regarded me thoughtfully. I'd been pouring my heart out to him every Monday morning for nearly 2 years now, but I'd never plopped down onto the couch and demanded his take on my sanity. I sighed. You want me to talk about why I asked you that, but I don't know why. I just feel sort of amped up. All right, he said gently. So, why don't you talk to me about that feeling? I opened my mouth and then shut it again. For once, I wasn't sure where to begin. I wanted to tell Dr. Jensen everything. That was what he was there for, right? On the other hand, I didn't really want to admit my recent extracurricular activities. Therapists might claim that they don't judge, but honestly, everyone judges. Well, Dr. Jensen, I had a nooner at the Four Seasons like it was some Hell's Kitchen flop house. Then I hit on some strangers, and I kind of wanted to sleep with them. Actually, take back kind of. You'd think I had gone crazy. I saw my sister over the weekend, and she tried to set me up with someone again, I said, shifting the subject. Subtly, I hope. And how did that make? It made me feel annoyed. I said, Dr. Jensen had heard a lot about my Lisa over the years. Such feminine perfection was a tough act to follow. I don't know why she doesn't believe me when I say I don't want to date anyone. Why do you think that is, Jane? Why don't you tell me? I said, suddenly feeling ornery. You're the expert in human behavior. Dr. Jensen stippled his fingers together under his chin and gazed at me steadily, affectionately even, but he didn't answer the question. I squirmed uncomfortably on his couch. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, and it was driving me crazy. I had a sudden and irresistible urge to fluster him. Would you ever want to have sex with me? I asked. Dr. Jensen blinked rapidly. For the first time ever, I'd actually surprised him. But before he could answer, I backed off. I'm kidding, I said. Really? It was a joke. Great. Now I've got to get out of here, I thought. Better to run away than explain why I'd asked him. Better to waste the appointment than admit to Dr. Jensen, and to myself for that matter, that I probably had a crush on him. Just a little one. I was about to stand up, but then Dr. Jensen started to laugh, as if what I'd said was actually funny. He didn't say, Why did you make that joke, Jane? Is this something we need to talk about? Instead, he acted like I just told him the joke about the guy with the 12-inch pianist. Relief washed over me. I hadn't blown this. Currently my only close relationship with someone of the opposite sex. But on the other hand, I wondered if Dr. Jensen ought to start talking to me about erotic transference or something. Didn't that seem like an obvious topic of conversation? It is not uncommon for patients to experience romantic feelings for their therapist. Blah blah blah. Did Dr. Jensen know what I was thinking? If not, why was I paying him $250 a session? I shook my head. I was obviously a little bit crazy. Dr. Jensen was still smiling at me. Come to think of it, he'd been smiling at me the entire time. I sat here, and I had to wonder for real. Did he want to sleep with me? There was one way to find out. But no, I wasn't that crazy. Not yet. Chapter 7. After a week of begging, Brian finally convinced me to go out with the brother of her current crush. A single date wasn't going to kill me, I reasoned, and since I just finished binge watching Homeland, my Thursday evening was wide open. And maybe, just maybe, I was a little bit lonely. Nervously, I approached Raynard. This would be my first date in 6 years. Then I saw the man who must be Nolan Caldwell waiting under the awning, eyes scanning the street. He was very tall and slender, with black hair and eyes almost as dark. Every inch of him projected unwavering confidence, from the sharp jut of his chin to the expensive Italian loafers on his feet. When he saw me, he hesitated. He looked me over carefully, like I was an expensive sweater he'd ordered off the internet that he wasn't sure would fit. Awkward. Nolan? I said. Hi, I'm Jane. I smoothed the shirred waist of the dress nervously. Jane Avery. I must have passed his test, because he strode over to me and kissed my cheek. Then he gave me a dashing smile. So good to meet you, Jane, he said, placing his hand at the small of my back. Ready to go in? But he was already steering me inside. At a cozy corner table, Nolan reached for the wine list. Not many burgundies, he said, a note of reproach in his voice. I had no response to that. If it was red and wine, I would probably drink it. He eventually picked a bottle for us and said, "You're not vegetarian, are you?" He was ordering steak tartare before I'd shaken my head. "We'll share," he informed the waiter. I looked at him in surprise. Who did he think he was? The CEO of Blind Dates? After he finished ordering things for me, would he ask me about synergy and leveraging my core competencies? Would he worry about his ROI for this fancy dinner? As I sipped my wine, which was so expensive and it practically tasted like money, I inspected him the way he'd inspected me. He was handsome and obviously rich, two checks in the plus column, but on the minus side, he'd already racked up cocky, presumptuous, and snobbish. "So, how well do you know Brian?" I asked. "Never met her," he said. "Oh," I said, surprised. I guess I thought I guess I thought she'd talk to a guy before she made me go out with him. "My brother and I don't run with the same crowd," Nolan said. "He's a gym rat. He even does MMA. Is that some kind of performance enhancing drug?" I asked. Nolan laughed, which surprised me since he seemed deficient in the humor arena. "It stands for mixed martial arts. Basically, it amounts to rolling around on the floor with some muscular, sweaty, and half-naked meathead." He tucked his napkin into his lap as he shook his head in disapproval. Really? Rolling around on the floor with a muscular and sweaty half-naked? Jane? Uh, what?" While my hand had seized that image and taken an R-rated run with it, Nolan was apparently still talking to me. "I was asking if you liked the wine. I met the vintner last summer when I vacationed in France." "It's wonderful," I said. "I'd love to hear about the vineyard." Nolan obliged me as I guessed he would, which meant that I was free to nod and smile, and to pay no attention at all to what he was saying. Instead, I thought about Michael Bishop. Actually, that's not right. I thought about the afternoon itself, the heat of Michael's hands, the tender urgency of his mouth, the sublime friction of skin against skin. There had been no need to talk to each other because our bodies had known exactly what to do. Those hours stolen from our regular lives had been electric. I'd never felt that free before. That afternoon was a 10, or at least a 9. I smiled to myself at the memory. Nolan, of course, assumed that my expression was for whatever boring, pompous anecdote he was currently sharing, so he began to talk more loudly. "Let the cocky bastard think I care," I thought. "As soon as I see the bottom of this wine glass, I'm out of here." And I was.